Cherry, out on Apple TV Plus, directed by the Russo brothers, starring Tom Holland. The film was based on a novel by Nico Walker, which apparently was partly autobiographical. In general, it's a pretty significant departure for the Russos after making 4 MCU movies, including the 2 last Avenger films. They're now switching back to lower budget personal storytelling. And also for Tom Holland, who, after Spider-Man, for whom this is certainly something different and more complex adult role to play. The film opened to very mixed reviews. Some people seem to appreciate it somewhat, but there were a lot of loud voices proclaiming it to be a total mess, saying it's awful, it's worthless, it's pretentious. I disagree with those voices. While I do think that the movie is flawed and imperfect, there are genuinely great elements in it that shouldn't automatically be disregarded, and I think deserve recognition. Anyway, it's a sort of a character study slash life journey of a young man played by Tom Holland. We meet him early in his college days. He's sort of shy and meek, keeps to himself until he falls in love with a girl. They start a happy relationship until she decides to leave him and move to Montreal. He is heartbroken, lost, feels he kind of lost his way, and so he decides to join the army and go to Iraq. The relationship then continues after all, on a sort of on and off basis. He goes through 2 years of hell in Iraq, eventually comes back with heavy PTSD, only to spiral into drug addiction. So the story is pretty damn dark and depressing. It's essentially a study of someone who, crucially, was not necessarily in a shitty situation to begin with, but continues to make terrible life choices and decisions over and over and over again, and eventually doesn't know how to escape their mounting consequences. But through it all, the character is completely believable, partly because the plot makes sense and the events flow naturally from one another, and you can see why he would make those decisions, even if they're not very good ones. But also mainly because of Tom Holland's performance. I think he's brilliant in the film and basically carries it with his acting. I didn't expect him to be able to play such a fuck up so convincingly and this drug addict person, but he does. And inside of that shell, crucially, there is a man or a boy even who has feelings and emotions and is often overwhelmed by them. Also, some people complained that it's difficult to believe he could be an army soldier with his, baby face and all. Well, I think it is believable. You have to remember that a lot of the guys who signed up for, in America especially, to go to Iraq or Afghanistan were 18-year-old kids. And to see that clash of youth and naivete with the realities of war is pretty damn powerful. In fact, I think that the whole war sequence of the film was my favorite. In some ways, it reminded me of Hurt Locker. There's also a fair bit of inspiration taken from Full Metal Jacket in the basic training part. So it all sounds pretty peachy, right? You may ask, where does the criticism come from? Well, mainly from how the film is put together, the direction and editing parts of it. See, as I was watching it, I thought to myself, this looks like the Russo brothers decided to use every single filmmaking tool they could think of that they saw somewhere else and decided, this looks cool. So we have fourth wall breaking narration. We have flashbacks and hard cuts to explanatory scenes or comedic moments. We have aspect ratio changes, chapter titles, playing with visuals to simulate drug use, playing with scene lighting and color to the point of feeling sort of unreal. Slow motion sequences, often coupled with extensive use of very dominating score, including operatic and orchestral music. Now, don't get me wrong, most of these are very cool indeed on their own when used right, when they serve a certain purpose and fit the tone of the film. In here, it just feels like there's too much and it doesn't necessarily enhance the storytelling. It's just there because it could be. As a result, it does feel over-bloated in terms of the cinematic techniques that are used throughout the film. It's also kind of jarring that some of them only appear in one section of the film and then never again. It creates this feeling of slight disconnect, like these are a couple of separate, disjointed stories. And thinking about this, I can understand the criticism of the movie being pretentious. It kind of does feel like that, but it mainly has to do with the execution of the story, not with the story itself. So it is kind of a shame that this mishmash, in-your-face style of filmmaking detracts people from appreciating the stuff that works about the film, which is the script and the central performance. In my opinion, even with the flaws, the movie is certainly worth getting through. To me, it actually never got to the point where I considered turning it off. It's just some things that could have been done better that stop this movie from being a really good one, but they're not significant enough to make it bad or even average. In my book, the positives still slightly outweigh the stuff that went wrong, and I consider Cherry to be a decent movie overall.